Hey guys, welcome to Intermediate Java Lesson 6. This is your final Intermediate Java lesson. Today we'll be going over the Hangman project. As some quick review, two questions. 1. How do you declare a 2D array with 3 rows and 4 columns? And 2. How do we get the element at row, column? Pause now and try to answer both of these questions. Alright. To get a 2D array with 3 rows and 4 columns, you'll say int bracket bracket array equals new int bracket 3 bracket 4. And leading into that, how do we get element at row, column is array bracket row bracket column. As you can see here, bracket row, 3 rows, bracket column, 4 columns. So we applied this concept in order to create this 3x4 array right here. Let's talk about Hangman. So the Hangman game is going to select a random word and then reveal the amount of letters in the word. The user is going to have to guess the word within a certain amount of letters. And then each time they guess, you'll reveal any correctly guessed letters. Now, what are classes? This is important because classes will be essential to creating our Hangman game. So what we've been working on until now is called the main class. It's the main class, right? It executes our normal code. But we can also make other classes, and they can be made and named anything we decide. They can be thought of as another version of main, but in a separate file. So for example, we can make a class student or a class car. Now, what do classes contain? Well, classes contain 3 main different types of things. The first are instance variables. These hold information about the object. For example, with class student, an instance variable could be string name or int age. The second type of thing that classes contain are constructors. So constructors are actually a specialized type of method that instantiates or makes an object of the class. And it sets all of the required instance variables. So for example, right here, if we have a class student, if we call the constructor, we're going to create a new object of that class. So we're going to create a new student. It also sets all the required instance variables. So for example, if I want the default age of the student to be 15, then I would set that age to be 15 in that constructor. And the third main type of thing that classes have is methods. These are anything the class can do. So for example, take test or do homework. You can think of the instance variables like the nouns about the class and the methods about the verbs about the class. So in example class, let's talk about the instance variables in our student example class. What are some facts about a student? Well, let's say name, grade, and GPA. String, int. And you would just declare them right here. And then you would actually set them to a certain value in your constructor. So speaking of the constructor, right here you can see this would be an example constructor method. We'll just say public student, and this is important. You'll always want to name the name of this method. If it is a constructor, the name will be the same as the name of the class. And then right here, we're going to take in 3 parameters, and we'll talk about parameters a little more in a second. So string n, int g, and int GPA. Then we're going to set the instance variable name equal to n, the instance variable grade equal to g, and the GPA equal to GPA. So that way we can call student and then say Bob, 1, 1, and then that'll automatically set name to Bob, grade to 1, and GPA to 1. Now let's go on to methods. So methods are anything that a student can do. So for example, take test or calculate the average grade are 2 examples of things you could do. Now, methods have return types, so each method returns a specific type of value. The return type is the second word in the method declaration. So methods with a return type of string, char, boolean, int, or double each return that corresponding type of value. But methods with a return type of void return nothing. These methods perform an action but do not return a value. So for example, in public void take test, it's not actually going to return any type of value. It's just going to it's going to calculate a random score, and then it's going to add that random score to a scores list. So let's look at the structure of a method. Right here, let's see calc average grade. You can see right here, it's saying that it's going to return a double, and then this is the actual return statement. So this is telling you what it's returning. In this case, it's returning total, which is the sum of the scores, divided by the number of the scores. And you'll notice right here, we have total and then divided by, in parentheses, double, and then scores.size. So why we put this double here, this is called typecasting. It's essentially converting scores.size, which is automatically an integer, into a double, and then you divide it. In this case, because total is a double, if you divide a double by an int, it's automatically going to return a double. However, it is good to put double there for clarity. Next, let's talk about method parameters. So some methods take in parameters, or input. Parameters usually go inside the parentheses after the method's name, and usually the output of the method is based on the input parameters. So for example, in public int add of int num1, comma int num2, they'll just return num1 plus num2. So if we say int x equals add of 1, comma 2, x is going to be equal to 3. And here are the two parameters right here. Depending on what we put in, it's going to return a different value. Next, let's talk about objects. So we briefly mentioned these before, but an object is an instantiation of a class. So think of a class like a template, for example, student. All students are going to have certain similarities, but you could have many different students that are all separate from each other. So each individual student is an object. So right here, we have our main class, and then we have our main method, and then it's going to print out, this is inside the main class, where the computer actually runs code that's called. And then in order to use any of the code we put in the student class, we need to make an instance of one. So this is just like creating an array list with parameters. For example, we'll say student Sally equals new student, and then name Sally, grade 10, and GPA 4. And then we could have student Joe, and then put a bunch of nonsense values in as well, and that would still be a completely valid student. So these are two examples of calling the constructor method of that class. Now let's talk about how we use a class. So you can call all the methods you created the class for the object of the class you created. So for example, I can call sally.taketest, 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 and finally sally.printGPA. And the GPA is going to be calculated based on the value of the GPA variable inside the student class, specifically related to the instance of Sally. So Sally may have a different GPA from a different student. And that's why they're called instance variables, because after each instantiation of that class, that object is going to have unique instance variables whose values may be different depending on the object. So let's talk about the activity. You're going to try and create your own class and make a car class with instance variables, year made, which is an int, brand, which is a string, and top speed, which is an int. Next, you're going to create a constructor that will take in 3 numbers as parameters and set them to the instance variables. Remember, you can ask to look at the previous student example. So if you'd like to go back and look at the previous student example, feel free to do so. And you want to pause now and try this on your own. All right, here's the answer. As an example, we'll have public class car, int year made, string brand, and int top speed. You'll notice we're not setting them equal to values yet. We're just declaring them. Next, the constructor method. Public car, and then it takes in 1 int, 1 string, and 1 int. And then it'll say year made equals Y, brand equals B, and top speed equals T. Now let's apply this to our hangman class. So using your car example, make a class called hangman. Add some instance variables like string to guess and blank string. Then we'll need some methods. So methods are good for code that we'll need to repeat many times in the program. Think of things in the hangman game that happen over and over and over again, like picking a word, generating a string of underscores based on the word, and then replacing some of the underscores with letters to show when they've been correctly guessed, as you can see here in this example. Now let's go into picking a word specifically. How would we store a list of words? How do we pick a random word from that list? How do we structure the method? What will it return? What parameters does it need? Well, let's put an example right here. We're going to say public string pick word, and then we're going to take an array list full of strings called word list. What do we put in here? Try to pause right now and think about what we're going to put in here. All right. So let's look at these answers. Generating string of underscores based on the pick word. What parameters do we need? What kind of loop should we use? If we were just sending the blank string variable, do we need a return value? Try to think about each of these questions. And this brainstorm is going to be super helpful when you're finally doing your Hangman project. So for generate blanks, which takes in a word parameter, what do we put in here? How many times do we loop? And you're going to concatenate a underscore that many times. So concatenate just means adding it to the string. So pause now and think about these questions. All right. Next, getting the user's guesses. We are going to use the scanner object. So for getting guess, public char get guess, this returns a character. We're going to say scanner equals new scanner of system.in. This is actually creating a scanner object. So scanner is the name of the class, lowercase scanner is the name of the object, and then you say equals new scanner. So this is creating the constructor, and then you're passing in system.in. You're just going to pass in system.in every single time as the parameter. Then you're going to say print out, enter a letter, and then return scanner.nextLine.char at 0. So what this is going to do is scanner.nextLine is going to take in whatever the user typed in. And then saying .char at 0 means it's going to take the first character that the user typed in. So even if the user tries to be real clever and tries to type in 2 letters, it's still just going to take the first letter that they typed in. And then it's going to return that. Next, we're going to replace the underscores guesses if needed. So if the answer is rhythm, for example, the blank strings would be this. When the user guesses a Y and we determine it is correct, we're going to update the blank to be blank Y blank. So here's a template. Public string eval guess of char guess. We're going to have a for loop, and we're going to iterate through. So int I equals 0, I, some sort of comparison here, string to guess.length, I++. So check char at index I in string to guess. If the character we're looking for is in the given index, then we add that character to blank string. So now you try to fill in the blanks right here, and pause if you need. All right. Now let's talk about checking if the player has won yet. Now that the player can guess and see their guessed letters, we need to know when they fully guess the word. It should return true if blank string is equal to string to guess. So pause and try this on your own. This might be a quick one. All right. Finally, our play method. We now have every individual part of our Hangman method, or our Hangman class, but we need to put them together. So we're going to need one big play method that calls every other method at the right time, kind of like a big boss method. So this does all the legwork beforehand, like picking a word from your word list and generating the blank, and then loop while they've not correctly guessed. You're going to set blank string to eval guess of get guess. And what are we doing in this line? Well, what we're doing in this line, and hopefully you had time to pause and think about that for a second, is we're going to evaluate the guess given the guess in here. And the guess in here is whatever is returned by the get guess method. And if you'll recall, the get guess method uses scanner to get user input. So it's going to evaluate the user's guess. Next, if they got an outside the loop, they must have guessed correctly. Now you try. The answer is going to be on the next page, so try to pause now and think about if you can find the answer. All right, here's the answer. Public void play. So first we're going to pick a word from the word list. We're going to generate blanks given the string to guess. And while they haven't guessed, you're going to set char guess is equal to get guess. So you're going to get the user's input. You're going to say string previous blanks equals string with blanks. So that's updating the previous blank string. And then you're going to evaluate the user's guess. And then print out current word and string with blanks. Next, at the very end, this is saying while not guessed. So if you get outside of this while loop, they must have guessed the word. So then you can print out, congratulations, you guessed the word. All right, that was the end for today's lesson and the end of Intermediate Java. Hopefully you guys have learned something. If you guys would like to review, you can go to Tuesday and Sunday's office hours at 4:15 to 5:15 p.m. at Zoom meeting ID 955-355-1000. This is a chance for you to review any concepts you weren't as familiar with online teachers that will help you out. Thank you for watching.